Lyric Theater, and we are going to do our pre-show religious leaders conversation. And I have Dr. Lisa Wolfe with us, and we're going to have a seat here and talk to you all a little bit about the importance of the show and other aspects, and just fun things. So I hope you enjoy. Don't fall asleep. The show will wake you up if you do, but it's going to be a good time.
You got a fan club.
This is going to be great. So, I do have some questions. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself, because you have a phenomenal career, and you have definitely changed so many lives. I have worked with so many youth and so many, they're all grown now, but that just talk about the wonderful things and the wonderful things you've taught them, especially with your research and studies about women in the Bible.
Well, that's very nice to hear. Thank you, Charlie. I'm Reverend Dr. Lisa Wolfe. I was ordained in 2000 and got my PhD in 2003 in Hebrew Bible. And my specialties are wisdom literature and women in the Hebrew Bible. So, this show's a little interesting for me to comment on because there aren't very many women in it. But I will say that Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice did a good thing, at least with giving us a female narrator, because most of the women would be behind the scenes. And that's, in fact, a lot of what I end up doing in my research in studying the Hebrew Bible, is looking for where the women are hiding. So I'll offer that to y'all next time you're reading the Bible, is to ask yourself, where are the women hiding in this story?
I think Michael told the story every performance we've had. I think he called you and said, I have all the names of all the wives. And you said, where did you get that?
Yep.
Because where did that information come from? And he was like, well, the internet. The internet's true, right? It has to be true. It's on the internet. And you're like, wait a minute.
I was raising my left eyebrow at him over the phone when he told me that, because I always tell my students, you won't perhaps be surprised to hear this, that there is a lot of incorrect information on the internet. And I think the percentage of that is slightly higher for anything about religion and especially the Bible. But in fact, I'm pretty sure that what Michael did was just type into a search engine the names of the wives of the 12 sons of Jacob. And what he came up with was actually accurate. So there is a book in the pseudepigrapha. This is the first big word I'll teach you tonight. You want to say it with me? Pseudepigrapha. So, thank you, Pastor Kayla, I think that was. Edited by Charles Wolfe. If you want to find it, there's 2 volumes. And then the second volume is the Book of Jubilees, which is a writing from the 1st century, either BCE or CE, we're not exactly sure. And religious communities most religious communities weren't really using that book. It was actually the Ethiopic Christians that saved that book. Were using it. It was has been part of their biblical canon. And that book highlights women, interestingly. And so it gives names for all of these wives. So that's pretty interesting. Because after we talked about it the first time, I thought, their names are not in the Bible. I would know them. And I was right. Their names are not in the Bible, but they are in the Book of Jubilees. And that was one tradition from Jewish history that just kind of faded away. But now scholars are more aware of it.
Interesting. It's really cool, I think, shows like this. There's so many musicals that have a religious background, or at least using some forms of text. You have shows like Children, Joseph, and you keep Jesus Christ Superstar. There's so many out there. So you see the essence of musical theater, pop culture, the Bible intertwining. So tell me what the importance of using pop culture, but also using the Bible and bringing that to a lay person or regular congregation, just people, everyday people. How are we using that in musical theater?
Sure. Well, teaching at Oklahoma City University, where we have such a thriving musical theater program. Go Stars, yeah. I don't know how to do the thing with my hands that you can, Yeah, okay, there we go. Thank you, Tyler. We have so many musical theater students, and what I always encourage my students to do is to connect my religion class that they are required to take with their field of study. And so believe me, I've seen lots of presentations on all the musicals you've just named. And I think that's great. I love pop culture interpretations of the Bible as long as they're clear that they are interpretations. I always get a little nervous whenever I see on a screen before a film or a television show or something like that that says, this is an accurate representation of the Bible, because you just can't do that. By the time you figure out what people were wearing, what people looked like, what the expressions were on their face, even the cadence of them delivering the lines, you've added a lot to what's in the text. But that doesn't mean not to do it. I think it's well in the Jewish tradition of midrash, which is deriving meaning out of something, elaborating on it, storytelling about it, and so this musical is very much that. But what I always hope that something like this musical will do is to drive people back to the Bible. And so I hope y'all want to go home and look up, it's Genesis 37 is where you want to start, Genesis 37 through 50, and then compare and contrast a little bit and say, well, I wonder why Lloyd Webber and Rice did this rather than what I see in the Bible here. Get curious about it. Notice where there are there are two different answers to who bought Joseph and sold him into slavery. What tribe did that? The Ishmaelites or the Midianites? So get curious about that kind of stuff, and then you can really learn some more. So to me, that's the benefit of something like this. And then we can also start to digest the material and think a little bit about, hey, what might this mean to our communities today or to me today?
I love that this story, as well as so many other stories, can be that opening of the door for people to have questions. And I think that's one of the things that so many people are scared to do is have questions. Are you allowed to have questions when it's talking about faith? And the answer, I would say, is yes. That's what makes you do a little bit more research, do a little bit more reading, going back to text and figuring out what's going on and what happens next. This story ends, and that's not the end of the Bible. It's the very, very beginning of time. So what else is going on? So I think it's very helpful for so many people that we have these pop culture moments where everyone's kind of enjoy it. Yeah.
Oh, you gotta love the creativity of it too. I mean, they're well, I don't want to give any spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
But there's some pretty fun stuff in the show. You'll see that they did creatively. So I want people to think about those things and why they did that. And I think my daughter asked me a question beforehand. I said, well, what would you want me to ask? And she said, well, what's the importance of this story? What does it lead to? That is a great question. Because this story is actually a prequel to the most important story in the Hebrew Bible, which I know you know what it is, but I'm not going to put you on the spot. It's Exodus 14 and 15, the Exodus story. That is the centerpiece of the Hebrew Bible. But after they had that, everybody wanted to know, well, they're in Egypt and they escape out of being enslaved by Pharaoh and stuff. Well, how did they get there? So then they go back and write the prequel, which we have at the end of Genesis 37 through 50. So I always compare it to Star Wars. Because,
wow.
I'll admit that I'm old enough that I saw the first Star Wars movie in the theater. Yes, I did. And then later it was renamed. What it's called now is Episode 4, A New Hope. Because that was so important. This is the centerpiece of the story, right? The resistance fighting against the empire. They had to write the prequel of how did they get to this point and who was developing the Death Star and all that. So it's a pretty good analogy.
I think it's very interesting. I think Joseph and so many of our stories in the Bible we think are children's stories, and then the kids start asking questions, and you're like, oh, I don't know, I'm ready to dig into how deep this really is. You mean his brothers sold him away can I do that? No, you can't do that. Those kind of things. But we start getting into these conversations with teaching kids in Sunday school. I was a children's minister for 4 years, and I worked for Methodist Conference Office for another 4 years, and I go through text and I go, why are we doing Noah's Ark every year? Like, I really have to explain? No, moving on. Those kind of moments. But it's wonderful ways to make a child interested. Just like these musicals are a wonderful way to make the everyday person interested in another part of our history and knowledge, just learning more that they can just enjoy at the same time.
Well, and you mentioned kids wanting to know, can I sell my brother into slavery? This leads me to suggest another way to think about it.
Don't do that.
No, don't do that. We are not recommending that. Whenever you're reading the stories, especially in Genesis, don't just think of these as individual people. Think of them as representatives of tribes. So this isn't just how a person behaves, but this is how a people behaves. And then we can, if I were to put my pastor hat on for a minute, we can kind of ask ourselves, well, who am I in that story? Or who is my community in that story? What role does my community or my country or my culture play that's like something I see maybe one of the brothers in this show?
It's wonderful. I think for those people that are out there that do know you, they're ready for you to get into the meat of your studies, and that's what I'd love to hear as well. So my next question for you are, where are the women hiding in the biblical material of Joseph? We hear about Joseph, we hear about brothers, we hear about pharaohs and everybody else, but we don't know a lot more other than that. I mean, we got the story before Jacob and his whole relationship before Joseph. Tell us, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna be quiet because this is where it gets real interesting.
Okay. Right, so we're going to talk a little bit about biblical marriage, friends. So Joseph's father is Jacob. So Jacob has the 12 sons, and he does not only have sons, but they're the ones who get highlighted as the eponymous ancestors of the tribes. And he has those 12 sons through 4 different wives. Right, he wants Rachel first, he gets Leah first, I'm thinking of Star Wars, and then there's also the handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah. And so those 12 sons come from those 4 mothers. And because Jacob wanted Rachel first and loved her the most, and it took so long for him to have children with Rachel, those are the special ones that are Joseph and Benjamin. And so, of course, Joseph is highlighted in the show, but you'll also hear Benjamin is highlighted in the show and in the biblical text. There is another chapter about a woman who is named Potiphar's wife. Unfortunately, there are many women in the Bible who are only called so-and-so's wife. Some of us Bible scholars have enjoyed giving them names. I'm sad to say I didn't think of the name to give Potiphar's wife. It can be a fun game, yes. Especially if you're playing around with Hebrew. And so you'll hear a little bit about Potiphar's wife in the show, and you can read that interesting chapter in the Bible. And one of the other things that's interesting is that chapter about Potiphar's wife and Joseph is very similar to some other stories we see in Egyptian culture. And that's one of the fun, nerdy Bible scholar things that I love to do, that all Bible scholars love to do, is to look for similarities in ancient literature, both in and outside of the Bible. So maybe we have some nerdy people out here. Can we do like Q&A?
This is your show.
Okay.
This is your show. Sort of worship, whatever.
Can anybody think of another Bible story that has a person who ends up in a strange land? It's not their own homeland. They may or may not be imprisoned. There may or may not be dreams involved, but they end up being the hero nonetheless. Okay, that's just people who know me said Ruth, because that's usually the right answer. But I guess Ruth could fit. That was not one of the ones I was thinking of. Esther, yes. Another one? Daniel.
That's
Very
what I was
good.
thinking. I was like, I'll give a guy again. So let me stop thinking about Daniel. That's what I thought.
That's right. Good. Good. So, and this was a theme for ancient Israelites who were very often living under the thumb, under the oppression of foreign rulers. Of course, it would be awesome to tell hero stories where your person is under the thumb of that ruler, and yet they rise to prominence because they are so smart. And so we get that really in Esther and in Daniel. Judith, actually, too, which is in the Deuterocanonical literature. So if you have a Catholic Bible or a Bible with the Apocrypha, you can read that book.
There's so many amazing, cool things that are. I am one of those kind of biblical nerds that have those fun moments. I think I saw Chris out there. I think I've asked him this question when I worked in the conference office. It used to bother me, and this is just my continuity issue. Going back to Daniel, you had Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But they had their names when they were home. But then when they take it to the new land, they would give them new names. But in the Bible, we always keep calling him Daniel. And it always bothered me. They're like, why did we switch to three guys, but not Daniel? I'll nerd out. I won't go there. I'm sorry, everybody.
That's a good point, though. You're right. And it's the same Esther, too. Her Hebrew name is Hadassah, but she goes by Esther in the Persian context. So we don't get that in the Joseph story, really. That's interesting. Though it does talk about him changing his clothes. There's a whole thing with Joseph and his clothes, as you can tell by the title of the show, which leads me to a little Hebrew phrase I thought I'd teach everybody. Don't you want to know what the Hebrew is for? I'm sorry to tell you, it doesn't translate to Technicolor Dreamcoat. Yeah, it's something like a long tunic with long sleeves. So here it is. It's Katonet Passim. Can you say it? Katonet Passim. So it's a tunic. Katonet is a tunic. And Passim means something like it goes to the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet, or maybe one or the other. So I often think of it as, all the other brothers have a poncho, but Joseph has sewn-in sleeves. So here's where the colored part came in, the multicolored part came in, is when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek around 250 BCE, which was a long time ago, so it's not nothing. They used a word that means something like variegated or embroidered or diverse or multicolored. And so that's where that translation came from, is from the Greek translation of the Hebrew. So it may be that by that time, by 250 BCE, it had been several centuries of people telling the story, and instead of it just being a cool, fancy long-sleeve robe, by the way, did you know it was also multicolored? And then that seeped into the Greek translation.
So I love getting more information, learning a little bit more about where this came from, because you think of a regular Bible story, and then what you're about to see on the stage, you're like, oh, this is fun. And there are some fun moments like that in the Bible, but I don't know if it's going to be as wild as you're about to see today, but it's super exciting, so I hope you all enjoyed that. But another question I have for you today is, what would most Bible scholars want most common persons to know about the biblical Joseph material before watching this musical?
Well, really, like I said at the start, get curious. Go back to read the biblical text and ask your own questions about it. And there are a couple of websites that I can approve of. So if you want to take them down, don't look at your phone right now. Certainly not during the show. But you can look at thetorah.com. And thetorah.com, I was just looking earlier today, has a really interesting article about Oznot, which is spelled with an A, but it's pronounced with an O in Hebrew. Oznot, sometimes pronounced Ozanoff, is Joseph's wife, who's Egyptian. I should have said that in the women question. So the Torah.com has some great material on it, because there was a later story written about Joseph and Oznot. And you can also go to BibleOdyssey.org. That's another good website. So don't look at the other ones. Don't click on the ads. good websites to find out some more information. And then look at various translations. If you don't read Hebrew, then at least compare multiple translations, and that'll give you lots of information about the difficulty, the struggle that the translators had. I usually tell my students, imagine a table of really nerdy linguists poring over ancient texts and trying to decide you only get to say this using one English word. You can't say, or it could mean this or that. Well, sometimes footnotes help you with that. So dig into that and let yourself get curious, and don't be afraid of it. It's fun, and I think what Lloyd Webber and Bryce do with this being so fun, I think that's the spirit of how these stories would have been shared. It's just that there is also a seriousness to it. The question, I think, comes back on us in the end. If we think of a story of someone wrongly imprisoned in another country, sold off by his brothers, if you will, who is that? And who are we in that story? And if that person rises to prominence, like Esther, Daniel, or Joseph, then should we be looking for who that person could be in our time, right? Not to say that it's predicting the future, just to say there are some kind of universal human truths in some of these stories, as there would be for any story that has been told as many times as this has.
For those that have been entering since we've been talking, some of you may be wondering what is happening right now. My name is Charlie Ludden. I'm the Director of Development here at Lyric Theater, and I have Dr. Lisa Wolfe here with me, who is just phenomenal in the knowledge she knows, not only just about the Hebrew Bible, but just about so much material and so many things, and has taught so many people. I was not one of her students, but I knew when she was in the room and made a presence, and I can remember so many conversations I had with youth that I've been around, and they told me, well, Dr. Wolfe said, and I said, she said it, listen to her, not me, because she knows way more than I do. The reason why we're having these talkbacks is because we decided when Michael was doing this show, he needed some perspectives from other people. It wasn't just going to be what he thought was right, what's going on. So he called on various religious leaders in our area and said, tell me what you know and help me make this show for everyone in our city, everyone in our state. So we had to get all these perspectives. So throughout this whole run of the shows, we'll have different religious leaders here to kind of give us some more knowledge about what we're about to see and enjoy it. So yeah, that's that. I just want to reintroduce that part.
Well, and I understand that these talks are on Instagram for the Lyric Theater's page, and so I encourage you to look and see what other religious leaders have said. A lot of them are my friends, and I recommended them also. And I would love to. I can't wait to hear what all of them have had to say as well. And Sunday night, my colleague Alan Levinson will be here, and he is a real scholar of the Joseph material. So that'll be exciting.
That's really, really cool. I didn't tell you this question, because I had one of my biblical nerd moments the other day, and I was thinking how interesting that when I was younger, I really related to Esau instead of Jacob, just because I'm big. And I thought it was unfair of what was going on, and Jacob being the prodigal son coming back. Well, then the story sort of flips when you get to Joseph. And I don't want to spoil what happens at the end of it, but then all of a sudden, Jacob and the boys have to go to Joseph. And who's actually returning, and what is home? So I don't know if there's something. That was my nerd moment last night, so there you go.
No, I love it because you did a couple of really cool things there, Charlie. One is that you were relating to the story and asking, who do I relate to? And that's always a great question to ask, but you should always follow that up by asking, can I figure out what it feels like to be the other people in this story too? And as I said before, don't just think of it as individuals, think of them as communities. And I just forgot the other thing I was going to say.
I will say it is one of my favorite things to do, and I've told many of you this, and one of my favorite things to do is when I'm reading the Bible or going through a study, I do try to put myself in the place. And one of the silly things I do, especially when you start talking about just what would have happened if it was today? And if, if I was in the story and you took one of the stories of Jesus, and then if my mother said, son, take these basins of water and solve this problem, and you say, why do you bother me with such things? What facial expression would my mother have given me if I said those words? And that's what's in my head. And my loving, strong black mother would look at me and say, boy. And I would go get those basins of water and do exactly what I'm supposed to do. But it helps you process what's happening in those moments, sometimes in a funny way, but it's a way to kind of relate to it in different spots.
Yeah, I love that. And that's always a great thing to ask is, and especially for theater people, how could I read this line? What would my facial expression be? What would my costume be? Where would I be standing on stage in relation to the other people? And you helped me think of the other thing I was going to say, which is themes. Look for themes. And you did that. You noticed this reversal of the younger and older brother. And we see that tension here also in the Joseph material. But themes of betrayal, themes of revenge, of what does it take in order to deserve forgiveness for what has gone by already. And those are really important themes, again, not just for individuals, but for communities. And so when we think about that for communities in the time of ancient Israel, we can imagine how some of those things played out. But some of those things are pretty relevant for our own time as well.
I could probably do this for another hour, and I won't do that, guys, I promise. But it's fun having these conversations and learning from some people who have done the research and done the work to share with so many people. So with the people that are here and the people that are going to be coming here and people that are on Instagram right now, tell us what you have going on. Tell us stuff about you. Just let us know what's happening before we exit the stage as we get ready for this wonderful show to start.
Well, I've been working on a lot of material about lesser-known biblical women. So women like, you may not have heard of Ritzpah. Have you heard of Ritzpah?
I have not, and I'll always be honest with you.
No, Rahab, more people maybe have heard of Rahab, of Deborah, but Yael, do you know about Yael? There's Huldah, and her story doesn't get out very often. So I really love telling those stories. There's a wonderful set of stories about 5 sisters. Their names are Machlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And you can find those in Numbers 27 and 36. So I love digging into those stories and teaching them to people because a lot of people think they've got the Bible kind of down. But I find that I can usually find a story they don't know, and that's a lot of fun for me. And I think it's fun for people too, also, to realize they didn't know the whole of it, and that they can start to inhabit some of those stories themselves too.
That's so great. Well, I want to say thank you so much for being here and just sharing your wisdom, your knowledge with the people here. It's always great to learn from someone. And I think when you're in school, no one really truly wants to be lectured at, but I think you're one of those people when you give a lecture, it's one of those moments where some people are actually listening and paying attention and are thankful for the things they've learned, the things they've heard, and so many people share their stories with other people here. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here today and what you do.
Thank you, Charlie. I can't